I'm Dan Blue, Democratic leader in the Senate. And we asked you here this morning to talk about conspiring with the co-conspirators. Cleta Mitchell, who many of you know of or know, vowed to help Trump find more votes in Georgia. More votes in Georgia. And now apparently she's looking to help Republicans lose a few thousand votes in North Carolina. That's the familiar approach that Republican lawmakers are taking with Senate Bill 747. We see Republicans tweaking voter suppression policies that were previously thrown out in court. We see them chronically underfunding our election boards, then overloading them with more work. We see Republicans blocking mail-in ballots from being counted. We see them continue to peddle the biggest threat to election integrity, the big lie. All of this is being done in the name of improving elections and increasing voter confidence. But it so smacks of deja vu in many ways. It's like we're being gaslighted as to the reason for this kind of legislation. It seems to me that there are two things that we could immediately do to improve voter confidence and efficiency in elections administration, if that were a real issue. The first is by simply not pushing debunked conspiracy theories about election fraud. They're not true. All of the reasonable studies of them have shown that they're groundless because they've been disproven time and time again. And they only serve to stoke the flames of hostility in our communities. The second thing that we could do is to maintain our involvement in ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. It's a sound interstate system that helps elections officials keep things running smoothly. But as Jim Womack, the Elections Integrity Network person in North Carolina, counterpart of Cleta Mitchell nationally, said just last week, and I'll quote, "It's not a good strategy for conservatives for more people to vote." That's why we're seeing pushback on ERIC nationally and in North Carolina. Because not only does it keep voter rolls updated, that is ERIC, it also contacts new eligible voters to register. The more that participate in a democracy, the better that democracy. Closest thing to town hall meetings or town square meetings in Greece, I guess. But again, that's not a good conservative strategy. Somehow it's become a radical idea to encourage people to vote. One of the fundamental differences between Republicans and Democrats is that one of these parties values robust involvement in democracy. The other values raw power. That's what we're seeing play out across the country and what we see here in Senate Bill 747. This bill suppresses voting opportunities, throws out legal ballots, and weakens already underfunded elections boards. And it's part of a coordinated effort by Trump operatives like Cleta Mitchell to sway elections one vote at a time. It's been confirmed that Ms. Mitchell, who was heavily involved in Donald Trump's failed attempts to overturn the 2020 elections, played a role in crafting this legislation. Word by word, quote by quote. To know that an election denier who goes around the country giving speeches about how we're making it too easy to vote, and especially for young folk and college students, had a direct hand in this legislation is deeply troubling. Now, I'll ask Senator Natasha Marcus of Mecklenburg County to talk specifically about the provisions of this bill. Senator Marcus.
Thank you, Leader Blue. I am Natasha Marcus, Senator representing District 41 in Mecklenburg County, and I want to talk to you about some of the specific provisions in Senate Bill 747, or as I like to call it, the jumbo jet of voter suppression bill. It's a very bad bill with a lot of bad parts, but I'm going to talk about the worst three. First, Senate Bill 747 requires that mail-in ballots must be received by the Board of Elections by Election Day in order to count. There's no more 3-day grace period to allow the U.S. Postal Service to deliver your ballot. This will result in valid ballots being thrown away. Whose votes will get thrown away? Well, we don't know for sure whose ballots won't arrive by the new deadline. Some will be Republican ballots, some will be Democrats, and some will be independent voters. Many will be senior citizens, students attending college away from home, people who are disabled, too ill, or medically fragile to vote in person, because we know that those are the people who most rely on mail-in voting. Regardless of their party affiliation, though, or their reasons for voting absentee, all of the mail-in ballots will be from citizens who care enough about their American right and privilege and obligation to vote to do the following: request an absentee ballot in time, educate themselves about the races and the candidates who are running, fill out their ballot incomplete, get 2 eligible witnesses to sign it, and now also print their names themselves. The voter then has to sign it, date it properly, include a copy of their ID, get it back in a complicated envelope correctly, put the correct postage on it, and get it in the mail, all by Election Day. Then they will do all that, and what will these Republican legislators force election workers to do with that ballot if it arrives the day after Election Day? Throw it in the trash. It's not trash. It's a vote, and it should count. The sponsors of Senate Bill 747 say, well, we're not asking too much, just get it in the mail a little bit sooner. What's the problem? Well, there are a lot of problems with this cavalier attitude about eliminating North Carolina's 3-day grace period. Number one, a lot of voters won't know about the change, and they won't know that their ballot's been thrown out until it's too late. North Carolina law on this point has been clear since 2009. It has been that you can mail in your ballot anytime up to and including Election Day. And there would be very little time, if they're going to change it now, between now and the next election, for everyone to understand that there's been a big change. Number two, it's not fair to let the speed of the U.S. Postal Service determine whether your vote counts. You can't control as a voter how long it takes them to deliver your ballot, sometimes from hundreds of miles away. Postal delays, natural disasters, they do happen, and they will impact the speed of delivery, and those should not be reasons to deny voters their right to vote and be heard at the ballot box. Number three, it's unfair to force absentee voters to cast their ballots way ahead of Election Day, before all the information is in, before their neighbors have to make their final decisions. North Carolina has always allowed voters to wait until Election Day to vote. We have never forced anyone to vote early. But this bill would change that and force anyone wishing to vote by mail to make their picks significantly sooner, to ensure that the ballot is in the mail early enough to get to the Board of Elections by Election Day. By the way, federal law ensures that Americans and military service members who are living overseas are protected against laws like this. And eligible voters living in the United States should have the same voting rights and the same protections. Now, Republicans who are pushing this bill justify the very unfair impacts by saying, well, it will make election results known to us sooner. And that feels much more satisfying to them since Trump threw a fit about losing in 2020. But I submit to you that Senate Bill 747 won't even do that. Election night results are always unofficial. Election night vote tallies are preliminary and will remain so even if this bill becomes law. Per state law, as most of you know, county results are not officially certified until the county canvass, which takes place 10 days after Election Day. And of course, statewide results are not certified until the third Tuesday after Election Day. Besides, it is very rare that absentee votes decide an election. So allowing a 3-day grace period for them to arrive and to be counted doesn't slow anything down. And if an election is close, which definitely does happen, particularly in local races, recounts are required under the law. The 1% recount threshold would be triggered, and SB 747 won't do a thing to speed that up. So the bill doesn't do what they say it will do. It only creates problems. Valid votes getting thrown away like old socks. North Carolina's 3-day grace period, I will note, was enacted unanimously in 2009. Since then, at least 10 other states have followed our lead and done the same. My, how times have changed. What was clearly a common sense bipartisan accommodation for the realities of how mail is delivered has now become a wedge issue about election integrity, used by election deniers to drum up unfounded suspicions to stroke the ego of a defeated ex-president and his lawyers, some of whom were in this very building just last week, consulting on the drafting of this bill. It is very sad to see. The second worst provision in this bill is that it undermines elections by defunding election boards. A poll conducted by Meredith College in February found that over 80% of North Carolinians would be concerned if a county lacked resources it needed to adequately administer elections. And there is reason for concern. The State Board of Elections was again snubbed in the budget process, with numerous staffing and funding requests being denied by Republican lawmakers. Senate Bill 747 makes it illegal for the State Board of Elections or any county boards to accept donations from private foundations for the administration of elections. Now, while private donations are not the ideal way to fund the necessary operations of free and safe elections, when the state government refuses to allocate the funds, like it did in 2020, it should not also block the private nonprofit funding that 97 counties boards of elections here in North Carolina relied on in 2020. And by the way, for which no improprieties were found to have occurred. And at the same time, Senate Bill 747 and the new photo ID requirements will create a lot of extra work for the state and local boards of elections, which are already underfunded and understaffed. The state board needs $6.5 million this year for voter ID implementation, to inform voters of the requirements, train poll workers, to offer the free IDs at the county boards of elections, which currently do not have the equipment or trained staff to do so. And also, Senator Daniel recently mentioned that there will be mobile units bringing free IDs to people's homes. When? How? Who's paying for that? The House budget allocated only about half of what the state board needs to implement voter ID. The Senate's proposal offers no extra money for this purpose, and in fact cuts 2 staff members at the Board of Elections. You cannot claim to care about conducting fair and safe elections and then undercut the board's ability to function. The third worst provision in this bill is that it also undermines the very popular option known in North Carolina as one-stop early voting, where eligible voters can come to a polling location during early voting, register and vote all at the same time. It's a great service that North Carolina has been offering since 1999. In the last presidential election, more than 110,000 North Carolinians cast their ballots using same-day registration. There are procedures in place whereby the county boards verify the voter's identity and address to ensure that they are eligible to vote. And election workers are very familiar, voters are very familiar with this process and have come to rely on it. It's been working great, but the sponsors of this bill, Senate Bill 747, want to land their jumbo jet of voter suppression right on top of one-stop early voting, making a mess of an orderly, popular process. The bill would force same-day registrants to vote a provisional ballot instead of a standard ballot. And then the bill creates new unnecessary hurdles in order for their vote to count via a process that is flawed and will disenfranchise eligible voters. It'll create long lines at polling locations and delays of election results statewide by creating lots of confusion and delay as poll workers have to explain to so many voters what a provisional ballot is, what they need to do in order to have it count, and then by creating a huge number of provisional ballots to review before votes can be tallied. And keep in mind, provisional ballots cannot be counted until after Election Day. It's a strange move by people who say they want to speed up the finality of election results. And then last, of course, voters may very well be dissuaded from voting at all if their ballot is provisional, which may be the point of this bill. I hope it's not, but we know that Republicans don't like one-stop early voting. They tried to do away with it altogether in 2013. The courts overturned that attempt, and now, Senate Bill 747, they are doing what they can to weaken it. There are more additional bad provisions of this bill, but I am going to stop here and let my colleagues speak with you now.
Good afternoon, I'm Amos Quick, North Carolina House District 58, Guilford County. My call and my warning to my Republican colleagues is one that I've heard, and it's very simple. Don't take democracy away. Democracy is not some abstract concept. It is a proven system of governance that means one person, one vote, and every vote is weighted the same. This Republican attack on that ideal threatens the very core of our democracy. A government where the voting power of the people is diluted is not one that any of us standing here and most Americans care to live in. We oppose this bill. We will always oppose this bill and bills like it because this bill threatens the very fabric of the democratic system of governance that we have sought and fought for. Keeping in mind that Americans not only have fought for a system of government, one person, one vote, they've also bled, they've also sacrificed, they've also died for it. The exaggerated accounts of voter fraud can no longer be seen as harmless and fringe cries from a fringe element because those exaggerated accounts are now being used to stifle democracy. I ask my Republican colleagues, why are you so afraid of people voting? Why is voter suppression now a part of the party playbook? President Trump lost the last election fair and square in perhaps the most secure and examined election in American history. Bringing in someone from the camp of an angry, unsuccessful campaign to help rig elections is not the North Carolina way. My charge is to always let the people vote, and I warn Republicans, don't take democracy away. Americans tend not to like that. Leader Reeves is next.
And thank y'all for being here. Robert Reeves, District 54, State House Democratic Leader. And what I would just say in conclusion is this. This is a continuation of what we've been watching for the last 10 years, 12 years. And it should be frightening to people that are watching it. And this is not an exaggeration. If you look at what's happened really since 2010, we considered to see a couple of things, a consolidation of power, and then a consolidation of ways to stop people from taking that power. And right now, the legislative body, by far, is the most powerful branch that we've got out of the three branches. And now we're making it harder and harder to do anything about it through the election process. I can't understand, just as my colleagues have said, why would we be doing this at this point in time, when especially after January 6th, we should be doing everything we can to give people confidence in our governmental systems. And what we're doing is continuing to make people question the very government that they're in. And so with that being said, I would challenge that what we should do is get together in some bipartisan fashion and see about how we can do things to make the franchise easier order and to restore people's faith in our government, not continuing to report things that tell them that something's desperately wrong. And I think, as Leader Blue said, using somebody like Cleta Mitchell should be frightening on a lot of levels. You can't tell me this is the only person you could find. You can't tell me this is the only person that you could consult with. You can't tell me that you innocently did not know about all of the accusations that have been made. And this is serious because it led to the worst attack on our democracy in the history of the country since the Civil War on January 6th. And then we're doing things that purport the same thing, putting in policies that will make it harder for specific groups to vote. And how do we know it will make it harder? Because we can look back to 12 years ago on the first voter suppression bill that was put in and look at the committee hearings. And those committee hearings went through how specific groups voted, what they cared about, what they used the most, and then took all that away. And then the other thing that we're doing is the same thing that was the attack on public education. You heard starting in 2010, public education bad, public education's bad, despite the fact that we were one of the leading educational states in the entire country. So then you start defunding, you start taking money from it, you start attacking it constantly. And suddenly you're having issues. Same thing we're doing with elections. We're taking all this money from our election process so that we can then turn around and say that elections are bad or something's wrong or something's been found. And that's not what we should be doing. We live in the greatest democracy in the history of the world. We should not be doing things trying to set us back hundreds of years in a way we use democracy. And so, with that being said, I am frustrated when I see these attacks. My colleagues are frustrated when we see these attacks. We will continue to fight these attacks because whether you're voting for Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliated, whoever you're voting for, we should be making it easier, safer, more secure than doing what we're doing right now. One, making it harder to vote, and two, continuing to fuel lies that have pushed people to desperate measures when it comes down to voting and when it comes down to the election franchise.